The Contemplative Outreach Prison Outreach Service Team was formed this past spring. It aims to facilitate the practice of centering prayer among people affected by incarceration, both through direct support and by supporting volunteers who share the prayer inside locked facilities. I'm delighted to introduce you to Hampton Deck. He's been the leader of a centering prayer group at the California Healthcare Facility Prison in Stockton, California, every Thursday morning since 2018.
Thank you, Mark. We'd just like to give you a little taste of what it's like to do centering prayer with those in prison. I never intended to go into prison, but I had a friend who had been going into 3 different prisons to pray with groups there, and that made me curious. And so some years ago, I felt called by God to go with her. So I began driving 90 minutes from Vallejo up to Folsom to go into Folsom State Prison. The group there is led by Ray Leonardini, who founded and leads the organization Prison Contemplative Fellowship. And Ray has created lots of resources to help both prisoners and those who go in to pray with them. Next month, his latest resource, a documentary film called Holding Still, will make its debut. And so right now we'd like to show you the trailer of that film. And you can also register to see the debut of the film on October 20th.
Once I get trapped in my emotions and I'm not careful, my thoughts run wild.
Before anything could make me feel any kind of way, whatever the circumstances call for, if it's just called for anger, anger. Called for violence, violence.
I blew it. There was so much shame.
Our brokenness, our shame is controlling the internal narrative that we have, which influences our behavior.
My thoughts would tell me all kind of crazy things about life, about what someone did, about the past, about me wanting revenge, about what I need to do to make things right.
We're talking about something that is so painful, it's killing you.
And that's what's so liberating about centering prayer and learning how to sit still with yourself, is that you have a space now where you could look at your thoughts and say, what the fuck am I thinking? What the fuck is that? Nah, that's not right. And it leads you to better decisions.
I mean, it's magical for me because it's God healing you, but in his own language. And God's language for me is silence, but it's a silence that really says something to you.
I remember after I had been going into Folsom State Prison for a few months, asking one of the men I met there if I could share with my congregation what I was learning from him. Of course, he quickly replied. In fact, if people in your congregation have questions for me, you can bring them to me on Monday nights and I'll tell you the answer. So the next Sunday, I stood up in the pulpit and told my congregation about his offer to answer their questions. And after worship was over, one lady came up to me and she said, I have a question for your friend in prison. I was kind of excited she had a question, but I wasn't really ready for what she said, because what she said was, what I want to know is if the people in prison are sorry for what they did that put them in prison. So the next evening when I got to the prison chapel, I sought out my friend and I said, I told my congregation you would answer their questions, and one lady has a question for you, but I want you to know this is not my question. It's her question. I already know the answer to this question. Well, what's her question? He said. Well, she wants to know if you're sorry for what you did that put you in prison, I rather sheepishly told him. And he very calmly looked me in the eye and he said, I understand. I totally understand. Please tell her from me that I am very, very deeply sorry for what I did, and I know that I can never make up for it either. I wouldn't be in this centering prayer group if I weren't sorry for what I did. Of course, I already knew that, but I didn't know, and I wasn't prepared for what he told me next. He said, but you need to know what happened in my life that led me to commit my crime. You see, my parents split when I was a toddler. I ended up living with my mom, who made methamphetamine. So from the time I was 2 years old, I literally grew up in a meth lab in the apartment I lived in. And my mom not only made meth, she was a junkie. She used meth and she sold meth. And when she couldn't do that, she prostituted herself to make money. And so I didn't get very much love from my mother growing up. She didn't pay very much attention to me, and I never knew when I would get my next meal. And I didn't have any friends either, because everybody in the neighborhood knew what was going on in the apartment I lived in, because they saw the dealers and the junkies coming and going. Now, as he continued telling me the story of his young life, it was extremely hard for me to hear what he was telling me. And if you looked at me while he continued to tell me the nightmare of his childhood, you would have seen me standing there intently looking into his eyes, nodding my head as he told me these things. But what was happening inside me was quite different. Inside me, I had fallen to the floor, stunned and staggered by what he was calmly telling me, because it didn't match the intelligent, kind, deeply insightful man standing in front of me. And the overwhelming thought that kept running through my mind as he talked was, if I had grown up like him, I'd probably be in prison too. And over the last 5.5 years, I've realized that every prisoner who's told me their story has a story like that. So going into prison to pray centering prayer with others has impacted me very deeply. I've been inspired by what I've witnessed and the absolutely amazing transformation that God has worked through centering prayer in the lives of the people I've met in prison. And it's taught me a lot about myself. It's exposed my pride, my judgmentalism, my privilege, my ignorance. But it's also expanded and deepened my capacity for understanding, for compassion, for caring, and for love. By calling me to go into prison to pray with those I've met there, God has shown me how God has transformed both their lives and how God is continuing to transform me more deeply. Perhaps God is calling you to this experience. But at this time, I'd like to turn it over to one of my friends, Lawrence Hamilton, who I met in Folsom State Prison and who you just met on the film we just watched. Lawrence.
Thank you, Hampton. It's really an honor to be here, because I really believe that this practice has the potential for transforming the whole world that we live in. I came to centering prayer by walking the yard with a friend of mine that I watched over a period of time turn into a more caring and compassionate person. And I realized that when I walked in the chapel, that it was because people cared enough to volunteer. Over 25 years ago, a guy named Mike Kelly, who was a student of Thomas Keating, brought centering prayer to Folsom Prison. And his friend Al Franklin, they kept the doors open till finally a teacher who was my teacher, my mentor, and my friend, who was before mentioned Ray Leodarnini. I'm not butchering his name. I've been knowing him so many years, I still can't get that. But what I'm saying is, he was the first one that told me, you can have an intimate relationship with God. And I was hooked from that point. I was intrigued. And I realized that through this practice, that's exactly what you can get. When you sit in silence and those afflictive thoughts and emotions that used to drive you to react in all kinds of strange ways just float by. And in that silence, you can listen to the voice of God who speaks to you in silence. a transformation occurs. I have not seen anyone that came to that session, to that practice, that did not experience transformation. And I realized that it's because of volunteers. So I would encourage anyone. I believe if you're here at this conference, you are called. And if you volunteer and go in, you are chosen. And I would just like to say that I know that I listen to these verses of the Bible where the guy goes to the gate and he says, "Let me in." And they said, "No, you can't come in. I don't know you." And he says, "Why?" He says, "Because I was in poverty and you didn't feed and clothe me. I was brokenhearted and you didn't comfort me. I was in prison and you didn't come see me." And he says, "Well, when did I do that?" He says, "When you did it to the least of mine, you did it to me." So I would encourage anyone that has this calling to just follow the spirit that leads you, because like Hampton said, a lot of us that have been impacted by the way society is and the way that we've been brought up, we've experienced a lot of difficulties, and there's something about this practice that really helps bring about transformation. I have a quote by Thomas Keating. He said, "To be in the kingdom is to participate in God's solidarity with the poor by sharing with them the good things that we have been given to us. In the New Testament, the great sin is to be deaf to the cry of the poor, whether that cry springs from emotional, material, or spiritual need. Although we cannot help but partake in some degree of social injustice because we live in this world, we must constantly reach out in concrete and practical ways to those in need. Divine love is not a feeling, but a choice." And with that, I'd like to pass it on to Ket, who was in the Centering Prayer group with me in Folsom.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ket. I'm a little nervous right now, so if I messed up, I apologize. I wanted to give you a little brief history about myself. I was 16 years old when I went to prison. And I was just released about a year ago after doing 25 years straight. It's a shameful part of my past that I regret. Growing up, I was a troubled kid. And throughout the majority of my life, I suffered from self-hatred, anxiety, depression, and just rage. I never knew how to deal with my emotions. Each time I would feel overwhelmed, I would either hit myself in the face or either resort to violence, gangs, drugs, and criminal behavior. I hurt so many people. There came a point in my life where I was just tired of being afraid. I was tired of waking up every single morning and feeling like a piece of shit, not caring whether I lived or died. It hurt so much to live. I was desperate. And to be honest, I was even suicidal. And that's how I came across Centering Prayer. A group of friends of mine, they introduced me to it. They encouraged me to go. I can't remember what my first reaction was, but I think I remember I was like, what the fuck is Centering Prayer? I remember me saying that. And looking back now, it's probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Centering Prayer, it gave me and others like me a tool. I have a practice now that allows me to go into a place within myself and sit still with my emotions, something that I never knew how to do before. And that leads me to make better decisions.
I think throughout this whole process, what I came to realize through this practice was that the greatest treasure with sitting still was that I came to find God. God was there all along waiting for me. He was everywhere. He was in people and situations and things, but I know now why I could never see those things in my life, because I was so trapped up in my own demons. I never would have gotten to this point had it not been for my sponsors, Ray, and everyone else who came day in and day out. For Christmas, for New Year's Eve, for Thanksgiving, they sacrificed their free time to come see me, and that meant a lot to me. That showed me that, you know what? People weren't broken. People weren't suspect. Life wasn't broken. They believed in me, and eventually, I started to believe in myself. I really appreciate them. I have so much gratitude for them, but I know that all these things would have never came full circle had I not found God within. For me, God is more than just books. He's more than just scripture. For me, God is spiritual, and I can't find God. I can't be connected to God if I have no place to go to, and that's within. Thank you.
Thank you, Ket. And thank you, Lawrence. And thank you, Hampton. Beautiful witnesses, all of them. My name is Chandra Hansen, and I too have a beautiful witness, but my job this morning isn't to share that. It's to tell you a little bit about the newly formed Prison Outreach Service Team. Prison Outreach, as you've heard, Ket mentioned Mike Kelly, is not new in contemplative outreach. It's been going on for decades, and some of those original volunteers are still doing it. Father Keatings made several visits to prisons in California, and you can see beautiful footage of those visits on our website. Many, many practitioners of centering prayer have participated in the rich and fruitful exchange that Lawrence and Ket and Hampton have described. So prison outreach is not new, but this service team has just recently started up again. It has existed in the past, but this iteration of it is new in the last few months. We're just getting started. And it's born out of the partnership between Contemplative Outreach and Prison Contemplative Fellowship, the organization that Ray Leonardini founded and that produced the short film that we saw this morning. And as Hampton mentioned, many, many other fantastic resources that all of us benefit from. So we really need to give a great deal of credit to Ray and to PCF, Prison Contemplative Fellowship. Ray has, in addition to those materials, he's also mentored countless numbers of us who volunteer. He's helped us spend hours on the phone, helped different people kind of get over the hurdles that are involved with getting started doing this inside a prison. He was, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for Ray, that's for sure. So great, great thanks to Ray Leonardini. But I also need to express deep gratitude to the governing board of Contemplative Outreach and to the organizers of this conference 4 years ago. At that time, they were making a big shift in how the conferences run. Many of you know this and have been to conferences before and since. They were making the shift to that grassroots model, to collaborative listening. We had small groups in the tables, and they very intentionally reached out to Ray and included prison volunteers in that process, seeing it as an important voice and important aspect of the community. So those of you who were at that conference in 2017 might remember there were about a dozen of us prison volunteers who were there. We ended up being basically one at each of the small group tables, and we did our best to represent the voice of our friends who are inside the prisons and unable to join us in person. We also spent lots of time meeting together and making connections. I know for me and for a number of us, that was the first time I'd ever met another volunteer who was taking centering prayer into the prisons. So that conference really was the beginning of this service team. It was an incredible experience. I mean, it's always good to be together at these conferences and to share, especially when we can do it in person, to share our stories and our experiences and our journeys. But especially in the prison context, there's something so isolating about prison. And even the volunteers, I mean, we don't experience it like the prisoners do, but we participate in that. And so to be able to share those experiences was just, it was really life-changing. And several of us left that conference determined to stay in touch and to keep figuring out ways that we could support one another. So there were immediate fruits in those connections, but there were also seeds planted at that time that would grow and germinate in time. Initially, we focused on sharing our experiences in writing and getting things into the Voice and the newsletter. We came to recognize the growing importance of the print newsletter that comes out twice a year because, you know, for folks who have a centering prayer group in the prison, like Lawrence and Ket did, that's one thing. But there are also lots and lots of prisoners at facilities who don't have access to that. And that newsletter can be a lifeline for them. It's really the only way that they can stay connected to contemplative community. So there was a growing recognition of that and a very generous response from the board, again, to help make sure that that would happen. And then in the spring of 2020, shortly after Mary Jane Yates became the administrator, she and Marie Howard and I had a phone conversation to try to figure out, okay, maybe what next? And Marie invoked Pat Johnson's famous saying, need determines function. And she helped me to understand that what we do here in contemplative outreach isn't a top-down answer. We don't go to the administrator and say, what are we going to do about this? Instead, we survey the people who are doing the volunteering and ask, what are the needs? So let's find out. So it was one of those phone conversations where you sort of think, gosh, you better watch out what you ask for. Because by the time I hung up the phone, I had been appointed prison outreach liaison and tasked with coming up with the survey. So it was, the ball was in motion and launched, and the survey went out in the winter of 2021, just last January, late January, I think. And it was beautiful to see the responses start pouring in. We ended up hearing from 88 people in total, and you can see all the details of that on our website if you want more information. But the bottom line was, just as at that conference, there was really this powerful, strong desire for networking. And so we put out a request to the people who had responded to the survey, asking for help kind of digging deeper and understanding how might we meet those needs. And the people who volunteered are now that we became the service team. So there are a handful of us who are continuing to seek to listen deeply to the needs of the volunteers and the prisoners and the former prisoners and everybody who's affected by incarceration. And our hope is to be able to just to continue to leverage the gifts of the organism to meet those needs. So if you've heard anything today that piques your interest, we'd love to have you join us in this effort. The tech team is putting up a document that will also be available to download. It's got just a few suggestions of ways to get started with us. You know, as has been mentioned, this is a ministry of presence, and it matters to go inside and sit in a circle with folks who are incarcerated. It matters for them, it matters for us. At the same time, there are lots of ways, and the second part of that handout shows different ways that you might be able to get involved from the comfort of your own home if you don't feel called to go into prison. Right now, we have 2 very active working groups and others that are getting started as we determine those needs. But we will always have groups working on corresponding directly with prisoners. We get letters from prisoners, and we have some, you know, there's some tricky things about figuring out how to have correspondence with prisoners. So we have a group of people who are working on that. And then we have a group that's working on the volunteer support end of things. And right now they're hosting monthly gatherings over Zoom to share ideas, talk about challenges. Some of them will be topical, some of them will just be, you know, general support sessions. And we welcome people who aren't yet volunteering, but who are interested in volunteering to those sessions as well. So all of us who've gotten involved in prison outreach are pretty convinced of the value of this form of service, not just for the folks that we serve, but for our own spiritual growth, as you've heard, and really for the growth of the body. So thank you.